morning, folks. Good morning, folks. It's great to be here today. You know, change never stops. The only thing constant is change. I think somebody wiser than me said that once. And I think it's certainly true for this industry that we are in. It's amazing. I don't know if you saw some of the statistics which went by. The millennials, 10 times more text messaging than phone calls on their mobile device. You would have thought that if anybody was designing a phone, they would make sure that it had a lot more texting capability than it had even the 3x4 dial pad used for making calls. Certainly for this industry, in the last 6 years that we've been participating in VoiceCon, change has been a big, big factor. You know, when we first came here 6 years ago, the reality we saw around us was this. This was your information worker's desk. You know, there's a desk here, there's a filing cabinet, there's a phone here. Don't worry, I'm not going to throw it into the dustbin just yet. And there was a computer on the desktop. And frankly, for about 10, 15, 20 years before that, maybe 10 years when the computers showed up on the desktop, these two devices really sat separate from each other, the computer and the phone right next to it. I've got all these stories about my own desk and how I've noticed that my computer kept getting faster and faster and better. And, it went to gigahertz and gazillion gigahertz and stuff like that. But my phone kind of looked the same, stayed the same for about 10 years or so. That's when we sort of came to VoiceCon. And there were a lot of vendors here, many of them are still around, who were building PBX systems which were designed for this reality. The reality that there's a desk phone which sits on your desk and you use it when you're on your desk. And if you're away from your desk, you're out of luck. That was the reality that we came in 6 years ago. And frankly, if you saw the statistics, that is not the reality that the world is in today. In fact, an average worker doesn't spend more than 40% of their time on their desk. So what does that mean? That the communication systems that we have been building, and in many cases are still building and still planning, are designed for 40% of the use. What happens 60% of the time that I'm not there? And frankly, that really is the story of change, that I'm going to share with you today. When we came here 6 years ago, and I remember one of my colleagues did the keynote 6 years ago, and I did the keynote 5 years ago. I came up and stood on stage, and everybody looked at me as if I had a full beard. And frankly, they were all wondering, what is Microsoft doing here? And Microsoft, when we came to talk to you, we really had just one idea. It was a very simple idea. The idea was this: if we had to design a communication system starting anew based on the needs that exist today, without being tethered by the past, without being tethered by a reality which looks like this, doesn't mean there are no phones. Of course, 40% of the time you will want to make phone calls that way. But if you had to design a system like that, how would you go about designing that system? That was the reality. That was the idea that brought us on the stage in front of you. More specifically, it was the idea that how do you take software, and how do you take software to create a communication system like that, which really met the needs of today and was not really dependent on what happened in the past. I mean, in some ways, we had the luxury of doing that because we were never in the PBX business. We didn't have an existing business we had to preserve. We didn't have existing technology that we had to bring along. We didn't have to preserve any of that. We had the luxury of being disruptive, to think differently. And that's frankly what we did. If you see the slide that is in front of you, if we switch to that slide, I think Bill Gates captured it really, really well when in 2007, when we launched Office Communication Server 2007, that in the next decade, sweeping technology innovations driven by the power of software will transform communications. So starting with that idea, which frankly was an idea at the time, an idea which may not have worked, but what we saw with Office Communication Server 2007, with R2, the update of that, and with something that I'm going to share with you now, is that it was an extremely powerful idea. It was an idea that has driven 70% of Fortune 100 companies to have OCS today. It is an idea that forces every player in this industry to have the conversation, what is the desktop strategy for your communication solution? That was the idea, and that idea has picked up with lots of momentum. So I think it is fair that given the idea was based on not just this scenario, that we actually just push this old desk away out of the picture and really just focus on the future. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to use all my strength to push it away.